Sometimes life changes in less than a minute. In my case, it happened in the 20 seconds it took for the elevator to travel up from the lobby to the 7th floor. I got on with my grocery bags, thinking about my granddaughter and the pot roast I was going to make for dinner. Everything was normal, routine, almost boring, until the elevator stopped on the 4th floor and my new neighbor, Samuel Vance, got on. He was a man in his 50s, quiet, soft-spoken, the kind who always greeted me politely. But that afternoon, he didn't look me in the eye. His breathing was ragged, and his hands were trembling. As the elevator doors started to slide shut again, he discreetly handed me a small piece of paper folded into quarters. His fingers brushed against mine, and I knew something was wrong. I looked up to ask him what was happening, but he just moved his lips and whispered, "Don't say anything." I opened the note without thinking. It read, "Pretend you're sick and get out of here fast." I froze. My first impulse was to laugh, to think it was some absurd practical joke, but then I saw his face, pale, tense, like someone who knows danger is standing right next to them. My heart started pounding in my chest. I didn't understand anything, but something inside me screamed to trust him. I brought my hand to my chest and feigned a dizzy spell. "Oh my God," I said, stumbling a bit. "I don't feel well." Samuel hit the emergency button. The elevator lurched to a halt between floors, and with some effort, he managed to pry the doors partially open. "Get out, Mrs. Grace," he whispered firmly. "Now." And that's what I did. I squeezed out, trembling, dropping my grocery bags on the floor. I leaned against the hallway wall while he stayed inside, holding the door. When our eyes met for the last time, I understood that this was no game. There was genuine fear in his eyes. But before we continue, I want to extend a very special invitation. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment down below which city you are watching from right now. Let's continue. Minutes later, sirens began to fill the street. The noise came from the parking lot, the echo climbing up the walls of the building. From my window, I saw police cruisers and an ambulance arrive. Neighbors started coming out of their apartments, alarmed. Someone shouted that the elevator was stuck between floors. Someone else said there was blood. I didn't understand anything. I wanted to go down, but my legs wouldn't respond. I sat in the hallway, trying to process what had happened. Samuel, the note, the fear on his face, what had he tried to avoid? What did he know that I didn't? An officer knocked on my door a few minutes later. "Are you Mrs. Grace Miller?" he asked with an urgent tone. "Yes, officer. What's going on? Did you know the gentleman who was in the elevator with you?" My heart stopped. What happened to him? He was found unresponsive when the paramedics arrived. I felt a pit in my stomach. "What do you mean unresponsive?" I just spoke to him. The police officer lowered his gaze. It appears someone attacked him. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his stare. I thought about that note and how, if I hadn't listened to him, it would have been me left in there. I turned on the lamp and opened the note again and again, as if the letters might change. The paper was stained with sweat. On the back, there was something written in very faint blue ink, "Don't trust anyone in the building." I felt a chill run through my body. How is that possible? I've lived here for over 30 years. I know everyone. Martha from the 5th floor who's always borrowing sugar, the Davis brothers who spend all day arguing, my daughter-in-law, Claire, who lives in the penthouse with my son. I froze. My daughter-in-law, the same woman who, just a week ago, had argued with me over an old inheritance. The next morning, the police returned to question me. They wanted to know why Samuel had given me that note. I didn't know what to say. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he thought I was someone else. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. He knew exactly who I was. When the officer left, I stayed alone in the living room. The elevator was still out of order, and the silence in the building was unbearable. I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for answers. Samuel had tried to save me for a reason, and if that reason had to do with someone within these walls, then I wasn't going to rest until I discovered why someone wanted to ensure I didn't leave that elevator alive. The following days were a mixture of silence and whispers. The entire building seemed to breathe differently, as if the walls were holding on to the echo of that crime. Doors closed faster, curtains were drawn with suspicion, and the elevators, which used to be a meeting point for neighbors, had now become a cursed place. Every time I went up or down the stairs, I felt eyes burning into my back. Some greeted me with feigned kindness. Others simply looked away. It was as if everyone knew something, except me. The police had been back several times. They wanted to know what had happened between Samuel and me. I told them what I remembered, his look, the note, the fear. The lead detective, a man with a weary face, listened to me carefully. "And you say you didn't know him?" he asked. I barely said hello to him in the hallway. "Interesting," he murmured, checking his notebook, "because we found your name written on a piece of paper inside his apartment." "My name?" I asked, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Grace Miller, 7th floor. He wrote it next to 2 other names, but the others were crossed out." I didn't know how to respond. The detective observed me for a few more seconds and added, "Do you know if he had enemies?" "No, but it seems like I do." That night, I struggled to sleep. The clock read 2 a.m. when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I got up quietly and pressed my ear against the door. Someone was out there, breathing. I felt a lump in my throat. Suddenly, something fell. A small, white envelope slid under the door. I waited a few seconds before picking it up. It had no return address. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and a newspaper clipping. The clipping discussed the murder of a businessman involved in a financial scandal. On the sheet, in hurried handwriting, someone had written, "It all started with your husband's inheritance. Trust no one." I let the paper fall. My husband, Edward Miller, had died 6 years ago. The inheritance had been the cause of arguments with my son and his wife, Claire. She had insisted on selling the family land, but I had refused. That dispute broke the little relationship we had. What does Edward have to do with this? I asked myself in a whisper. The next morning, I went down to the lobby. The neighbors were gathered there like vultures over a secret. Martha, from the 5th floor, looked at me with curiosity. "Grace, did you hear? The man who died in the elevator was an accountant. They say he worked for a woman on the 8th floor." I felt a shiver. "The 8th floor?" "Yes, Claire Rivers." "Isn't that your daughter-in-law?" I didn't answer. I just nodded, trying not to show the trembling in my hands. I returned to my apartment with my mind racing. Samuel, the note, the murder, the accountant, everything was starting to connect, but I still didn't understand how. That afternoon, I decided to go to my son's apartment. David received me with a tired smile. "Mom, what a surprise. Come in, please." The place was impeccable, as always. Claire, his wife, appeared a few seconds later, wearing a silk robe, smiling coldly. "Good to see you, Grace. To what do we owe the honor?" "I just wanted to know if you heard anything about the elevator incident," I replied, measuring my words. "Terrible." "Yes," she said, feigning horror. "That man was my accountant." I froze. "Your accountant?" "Yes. He handled some matters for me, minor things, nothing important," she said, avoiding eye contact. David intervened. "Mom, please don't start." "I'm not starting anything, son. I'm just asking." "Really? There's nothing strange about it," Claire added, smiling. "That man had enemies. It doesn't surprise me that he ended up like that." I said goodbye quickly, my heart racing. I didn't know if it was my imagination, but there was something in her tone, an unsettling confidence, as if she knew more than she was saying. That night, I went through my husband's old documents. In one of the folders, I found a sheet with a name underlined. Samuel Vance, the same man who had given me the note. And in the margin, in my husband's handwriting, he had written, "Trust him if something happens to me." My blood ran cold. Samuel knew Edward. He was watching over me on my own husband's orders. And Claire, what role did she play in all this? At midnight, I decided to go out into the hallway. I couldn't sleep. When I reached the elevator, I saw something that froze my blood. The door was open, still bearing the dried stains from the day of the crime. On the floor, there was a small spot of blue ink, the same ink from the note Samuel had given me. I looked up towards the 8th floor, and for an instant, I could have sworn I saw the shadow of a woman watching me from the upper landing. A tall, still shadow, wearing a silk robe identical to Claire's. I retreated slowly, closed my apartment door, and locked the deadbolt. I sat in the darkness, unable to stop thinking. The note, the clipping, my husband's name, the connection to Samuel, Everything pointed to a truth that was barely beginning to surface. And although fear paralyzed me, something else was growing inside me, a suspicion that hurt more than the terror. Because if Samuel had been my protector, then the threat must be coming from someone I loved. 3 days passed since I last slept well. Since I learned that Samuel Vance's name was written in my late husband's papers, I couldn't get his face out of my mind. That desperate look, that note written in blue ink, that warning that saved my life. It was no longer a coincidence. It was a message coming from the past, from a past that someone was trying to erase. The whole building seemed to look at me differently. In the elevator, now repaired, no one said a word. Everyone looked down, pretending they knew nothing. But I watched them, Martha, who spent more time spying through her peephole every day, the Davis brothers, who had suddenly become friendly, almost servile, and above all, Claire, who feigned cordiality every time our paths crossed, but couldn't hide that nervous glint in her eyes. She knew something. I felt it. I decided to go to the building's maintenance room where the security cameras were monitored. I knew the super, Luke, a young guy in his 20s, quiet and helpful. When I asked him to show me the footage from the day of the murder, he hesitated. "I don't know if I should do that, Mrs. Grace." "Look, son," I told him in a low voice. "That man saved my life. I just need to understand why." Luke nodded, closed the door, turned on the screen, and began playing the images. The video showed the 4th-floor hallway. Samuel entered the elevator, then I did, and then nothing. The recording stopped right before he handed me the note. "See?" Luke said. "There's a 5-minute cut. And who can access those recordings? Only the building manager. And, well, some owners. If they ask with authorization, owners like who? For example, Mrs. Claire Rivers?" My heart skipped a beat. My daughter-in-law? Yes. She requested access 2 weeks ago to review an alleged theft in her apartment. I didn't say anything. Luke kept searching through the files and found something else. "Look at this," he said, zooming in on the image. In the 8th-floor hallway, barely an hour before the crime, Claire could be seen entering the building with a large black bag. 10 minutes later, she was running out. "Could you make me a copy of this?" I asked him. "Of course. But be careful, ma'am. Not everyone in this building is what they seem." That afternoon, I returned home with the USB drive in my pocket. I looked at it as if it were a ticking time bomb. Proof that something terrible had been right in front of me without me seeing it. I turned on my computer and reviewed the recording over and over again. There was Claire. Her hurried walk, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses, the bag pressed against her body, and something else. When she left the building, she looked up toward my window. Fear mixed with anger. If Samuel was connected to my husband, and Claire had been in the building that day, then it hadn't been a random murder. It had been a failed warning, and I had been the original target. I decided to keep the evidence in a sealed envelope along with the note Samuel had given me. I hid them in the false bottom of a drawer, but that night, someone entered my apartment. The noise woke me up around 2 a.m. It was a slight sound, almost imperceptible. The creaking of the parquet floor in the living room. I got up without turning on the light, barefoot, my heart beating 1,000 times a minute. From the shadows, I saw a figure moving near the desk. I couldn't distinguish who it was, but I saw the slender, feminine silhouette, and in her hand, something metallic shined a key. I hid behind the door and waited. The shadow opened the drawer, rummaged clumsily, and then left hurriedly. When I dared to look, the envelope was gone. I went out into the hallway, but there was no one there anymore, just the scent of expensive perfume, the same one Claire had worn since she married my son. The next morning, I called her. "Claire, I need to talk to you," I said calmly. "I'm busy right now. It'll be quick. It's about Samuel." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "What does that man have to do with me?" she asked with a tense voice. "You tell me." She hung up. That night, fear turned into determination. If someone had stolen the evidence, it meant I was right. It meant someone was afraid of what I knew. And that person didn't just want to erase tracks. She wanted to erase my voice. I called Luke again. "I need you to copy the entire system, the recordings from the last 3 weeks," I asked him. "What's going on, Mrs. Grace?" The same thing that happens when the truth starts to come to light. The fear changes owners. A few hours later, I received an anonymous text message on my cell phone. Don't look any further. Your curiosity is going to get you killed. Just like Samuel. The number was unknown. I looked at the screen with trembling hands. I felt an icy current run through my body. I deleted the message and turned off the phone. I stood looking out the window toward the 8th floor, where the light in Claire's apartment was still on. Behind that window, I knew someone was watching me too, someone who no longer feared getting their hands dirty. And that night, I decided, if they wanted to silence me, they were going to have to hear me scream first. The truth doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water through a crack, until it finally soaks everything. And when it's too late to stop it, you realize that what you thought was your life was actually a stage where others were pulling the strings. After the anonymous message, I knew I couldn't trust anyone. Claire didn't answer my calls. David, my son, still suspected nothing, and Samuel was still dead. But in every corner of this house, something told me his story wasn't over yet. That morning, I went to my husband's library. Since his death, I hadn't gone back in there. The air smelled of old paper and wood. On his desk, covered with a layer of dust, were folders with his unmistakable handwriting. I opened them one by one until I found a sealed envelope with my name, Grace. If something happens to me, find Samuel Vance. He is the only one I trust. I felt a chill. Everything was connected. Edward had known him, perhaps even worked with him. But on what? Among the documents, I found a thicker folder marked with a name I was beginning to hate, Claire Rivers. Inside were copies of contracts, wire transfers, and photographs. And there, finally, the truth began to take shape. Before he died, my husband had discovered that Claire and her family had used shell companies to siphon money from the family assets. Samuel, who worked as an auditor at the time, had been his secret collaborator. When Edward got sick, he wanted to report everything, but he didn't get the chance. He died in a car accident, one that I now started to doubt. Rage ran through my body like fire. For years I had believed my husband's death was a blow of destiny, but now I understood that someone had pushed him toward that destiny. Claire, the woman who married my son for convenience, the one who smiled while she stole from me, the one who perhaps killed my husband and then wanted to get rid of me. My hands were shaking. For a moment, hatred clouded my vision, but I took a deep breath. If I learned anything in life, it's that fury without intelligence is a weapon that shoots itself, and I wasn't going to make that mistake. I called Luke. "I need your help again, son." "Did you find something?" he asked. "Too much, but I can't prove it alone." I asked him to come over that night. He brought his computer, and we reviewed the system backups together. "Look at this," he said, enlarging one of the recordings. The night before the murder, someone entered the building manager's office. "Can you zoom in closer?" Luke adjusted the image. Claire's face appeared sharp, illuminated by the computer screen. She was removing a USB drive and replacing it with an identical one. "She's altering the recordings," he whispered. "And not just that," I said. "She's erasing her own trail." I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with the lights off, watching the lit window on the 8th floor. Claire still didn't know I had the proof I needed, and that gave me a small advantage. The problem was David. My son continued to defend her blindly. The next morning, I summoned him to talk. "Son, I need you to listen to me without interrupting." "Mom, not this again," David said. I said firmly. "Your father didn't die in an accident." I saw him turn pale. "What are you saying?" "I have proof. Documents. Your wife was involved in fraud, and the man who died in the elevator was part of that plot." "Stop it, Mom!" he shouted, standing up. "Don't make up crazy stories." "I'm not making anything up. She knew Samuel was going to talk. That's why they killed him." You're delusional." He looked at me with fury. But deep down I saw something different. Fear. Fear that it might be true. That night, Claire called me. "What did you tell David?" she asked in a low, contained voice. "Only the truth. You should be careful, Grace. People who dig up the past sometimes end up buried with it." "Is that a threat?" "No, it's advice." And she hung up. I stood looking at the phone, trembling. It was the first time she showed her true face. She didn't bother pretending anymore. At midnight, I went down to the mailbox and found an envelope with the same blue ink as the elevator note. Inside was a single sentence. "Don't face her alone. Wait for my signal." My heart skipped a beat. The handwriting was the same as Samuel's. Was it possible? Could he be alive? I ran upstairs with the envelope pressed against my chest. If Samuel had survived, it meant everything could still change. And if not, someone was following his plan for him. That night I didn't sleep. Fear wasn't fear anymore. It was fuel. The pain had turned into strategy, and for the first time in a long time, I stopped being the victim. I took my husband's documents, Luke's recordings, and the note. I put it all in a red folder and wrote a phrase on top. The truth isn't hidden, it is awaited. I have the come intelligence of time and the problem-sided, and it was weighted by the condition, and the problem-sided, and the problem-sided by the come intelligence and place call. I kept the folder in a safe place. I knew Claire wouldn't stay still. I knew she would come for me, and when she did, I was going to be waiting for her. When a woman has been betrayed many times, she learns to smile even while setting the trap, and I had spent a lifetime learning. The letter with Samuel's handwriting gave me the impulse I needed. Don't face her alone. Wait for my signal. That was the phrase that kept me standing. I didn't know if it came from him or someone following his trail, but the message was clear. I shouldn't rush. I spent the following days planning. It had to be done calmly, without raising suspicions, because if there was one thing that characterized Claire, it was her ability to fake it. She knew how to manipulate, she knew how to lie, and above all, she knew how to hide fear. I decided to organize a family dinner. It was something I hadn't done since before Edward's death. I called David with the sweetest voice I could fake. Son, it's been a while since we had dinner together. I'd like to invite you both. Are you sure, Mom? Claire doesn't know if... Tell her it will be a quiet dinner. Just family. Okay, I'll tell her. When I hung up, I took a deep breath. Quiet, I thought. That is exactly what it won't be. Before we continue, tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in my place. Don't leave the video because what comes next will give you goosebumps. Now, let's continue. That night, I sat at the table and observed every detail. White tablecloth, clean glasses, lit candles. Nothing should look out of the ordinary, but under the tablecloth, in a black folder, rested the evidence. The documents my husband had kept, the photos, the recordings, and the copies Luke had recovered from the system. When I heard the doorbell, my heart jumped. David entered first, smiling. Behind him, Claire in her red dress and that calculated look that always reminded me of a cat observing its prey. How lovely everything looks, Grace, she said, brushing her fingers over the china. I didn't know you still had the desire to celebrate anything. There's always something to celebrate, dear, I replied, especially when the masks start to fall off. She smiled, not yet understanding. The special guest arrived a few minutes later. Luke. And who is this? Claire asked with an annoyed tone. A friend of the family, I said. He's helped me a lot lately. Luke greeted them politely and sat next to me. The atmosphere was thick. David tried to break the ice with small talk, but the tension could be cut with a knife. We began to eat between bites and glances. I was waiting for the right moment. When Claire poured the wine, I saw her hands shake just barely. The sign was minimal, but for me, it was enough. I knew something was unsettling her. Maybe she sensed she no longer controlled the board. David, I said aloud, faking a smile. Do you remember the man from the elevator? He nodded uncomfortably. Why do you mention him? Because I found out something interesting. I pulled the black folder from the drawer and placed it on the table. Claire turned pale. What is that? She asked. The truth, I replied. Luke opened his laptop and projected an image onto the wall, one of the recovered recordings. It clearly showed Claire entering the maintenance room, replacing a USB drive. David stood up abruptly. What does this mean? That someone, I answered, erased the recordings that could prove who killed Samuel Vance. Claire tried to maintain her calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you know, I said firmly. Samuel worked with Edward, and when your father-in-law discovered your fraud, you silenced him. Silence fell like a hammer blow. David put his hands to his head. Claire, tell me it's not true. Of course not, she shouted. That recording is fake. Luke looked at her without blinking. It could be. If it weren't for the fact that I also have the financial files you modified and the transfers in your name, Claire lost all color. She tried to stand up, but David stopped her. What did you do, Claire? She didn't answer. She just started to cry, covering her face with her hands. I watched her in silence. I didn't feel relief or triumph, just a deep sadness. I had loved this woman like a daughter, and she had returned poison to me. But justice, however late, arrives. The living room phone rang suddenly. Luke answered and passed it to me. "For you, ma'am." On the other end, an unknown voice said, "It's done. The file was delivered. She won't leave the country." I hung up without saying a word. Claire looked at me, terrified. "What did you do?" "Nothing you don't deserve," I replied. "I just returned the favor you gave me in the elevator." David, in shock, collapsed into his chair. Claire began screaming at him that it was all a lie, that I was manipulating her, that she would lose everything, but he wasn't listening to her anymore. He just repeated, "You killed him. You killed him." She collapsed weeping, and at that moment, I knew it was over. That night, when the agents took her away, the whole building came out into the hallway. No one said anything. They just watched as the woman in the red dress was led down the stairs in handcuffs. Luke approached me and said, "Did you do the right thing, Mrs. Grace?" "No," I replied. "I did what was necessary." When they closed the door and silence returned, I looked at the ceiling, at the cameras, and whispered, "Thank you, Samuel." Because although I never saw him again, I understood that he was the first piece in a plan that began long before I knew it. 3 days passed since the night of the dinner, 3 days in which I didn't sleep, didn't eat, and barely spoke to anyone. The building, once full of murmurs, now seemed to breathe in silence. No one mentioned Claire's name. No one dared to, but her shadow was still there, floating in the air like a perfume that won't go away. David didn't come back home. I understood. He needed time to digest that the woman he shared a decade with had been capable of so much. And I, although I didn't say it out loud, also needed to assimilate that the person who had hurt me the most was still alive and wanted to see me. The call came one afternoon when the sky was painted gray. "Mrs. Grace Miller?" asked a firm voice on the other end. "Yes. Inmate Claire Rivers requests to see you. She is in pretrial detention." "See me? For what?" "She says she has something to confess to you." For a moment, I thought about refusing. I owed her nothing, but something inside me compelled me to accept. Maybe I needed to hear her say it. Maybe, deep down, I wanted to look the monster in the eye and verify that she had indeed been human once. The detention center smelled of dampness and disinfectant, the echo of metal doors mixed with the distant murmur of the guards. When they guided me to the visitation room, I saw her behind the glass, pale, disheveled, without makeup. Her gaze, once haughty, was now an empty well. For a second I felt pity. Only a second. "Thanks for coming," she said, picking up the phone. "I didn't come for you, Claire," I replied. "I came for the truth." She lowered her gaze and took a deep breath. "I didn't kill Samuel," she said suddenly. I remained silent. "What?" "Listen to me. I didn't kill him. And you want me to believe that?" "It was David." The world seemed to stop. "What are you saying?" I whispered. "Samuel knew things about me." "Yes, but he also knew things about your son." "No!" I shouted. "That's a lie." "No, Grace. Your son got scared. He thought if Samuel talked, the whole family would be tainted. He confronted him in the elevator. They fought. The blow was harder than he expected. I arrived later. I stood paralyzed. "Why invent that now?" "Because it's not in my interest to die alone," she replied, looking at me with an icy glint in her eyes. The guard knocked on the door, but I asked for a few more minutes. I needed to understand if what I had just heard was one more lie or the missing piece of the puzzle. Claire continued, her voice almost trembling. "I tried to cover for him, erased the recordings, manipulated the files, but it was all for him, Grace, not for me." "And why confess now?" "Because he won't hesitate to sink you. I know him too. He's weak. He won't be able to handle the guilt." I stared at her face. There were no tears or remorse, just an unsettling calm. The calm of someone who knows their last card can still cause havoc. "Why did you summon me, Claire?" I asked finally. "Because I want a deal," she said. "If you help me get out, I promise to hand over something your husband left before he died." "What are you talking about?" "A recording. Edward knew something was going to happen and left it with me." "A recording?" "Yes, but if I don't get out of here, no one will ever see it." I looked at her in silence. I knew it could be a trick, another manipulation, but I also knew Claire never said anything without a purpose. "Where is it?" I asked. She smiled. "Ah, no, dear. First I want my freedom, then I'll give you the rest." The guard opened the door. "Time's up." Claire hung up the phone, stood up, and before leaving, told me without looking at me, "If you think you won, you're wrong. Your family is still tainted. Samuel only uncovered half of it." I returned home with my mind at war. Her story was absurd, but there was something in her tone, a truth hidden among lies. David wasn't answering my calls, and deep down, a horrible fear began to grow. What if Claire wasn't lying? What if my son had really been there in that elevator? I searched for the folder with the evidence, the photos, the logs. I had forgotten a detail. In one of the images of the elevator, right in the reflection of the polished steel, a tall, masculine shadow could be seen. And it wasn't Samuel, nor was it me. That night, before sleeping, I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was tired, but my eyes remained firm. If my son has a part in this, I told myself, I will find out. And if not, then Claire will pay for the last deception of her life, because the truth, sooner or later, always demands its sacrifice. There are silences that weigh more than any word, silences that are not a pause, but a sentence. And since the visit to the jail, the silence of my son David became the most unbearable sound of my life. He didn't call me again, didn't answer my messages, didn't even come to look for me. For days I lived between two certainties fighting in my head. One part of me believed his silence was guilt, and the other that it was fear. Fear of what I might know. The truth began to crumble in front of me little by little, like a wall that has been cracking for years until it suddenly falls. The evidence, the names, the looks, and the recording from the elevator. I don't know how many times I watched it, but every time I did, a part of me died a little more. In the reflection of the steel, behind Samuel, a tall, male silhouette could be seen. It wasn't sharp, but there was something in the way he moved, in the curve of his shoulders, in the way he tilted his head, something that felt too familiar to me. I paused the recording, enlarged the image, and I knew. It was David. My heart beat so hard I felt like my chest was going to break. I couldn't breathe. For a moment I thought my soul would escape through my mouth. Claire hadn't lied, at least not entirely. That night the house felt colder than ever. I stayed awake in the living room with the lights off, watching the rain hit the glass. Every drop that fell reminded me of a lie, a betrayal, a word I preferred not to hear when I still could have. When David was a child, he always came to my bed when he had nightmares. He would curl up next to me and say, "Mom, don't let the man with the dark eyes take me." And I would stroke his hair and whisper, "As long as I breathe, no one will hurt you." That night I realized I hadn't been able to keep that promise. I didn't protect him from the world, and worse yet, I didn't protect him from himself. Near dawn, the doorbell rang. I jumped. I went to the door with my heart racing. When I opened it, David was there, disheveled, hollow-eyed, with a lost look. He seemed not to have slept in days. "Mom," he said with a threat of a voice, "I need to talk to you." For an instant, I wanted to close the door on him, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I didn't know if I had the strength to listen to him. But in the end, love is stronger than rage. "Come in," I whispered. He sat on the sofa with his hands clasped. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard, marking the distance between what we were and what we would no longer be. "Claire told you something, didn't she?" he asked finally. "Yes, and I want to hear it from you." He remained silent. He took a deep breath, looked at me with red eyes. "It was an accident." That short sentence destroyed me. I sank into the chair. I wanted to believe I had heard him wrong, but no. David brought his hands to his face. "Samuel came looking for me," he said between sobs. He told me he had proof that he was going to reveal everything Claire was doing, that if I didn't cooperate he was going to ruin my career, my name, everything. "And what did you do?" I went to confront him. He recounted that he waited for him in the elevator, that they argued, that Samuel told him he had information that could sink us all. I was furious. "Mom, I didn't know what to do." "And then?" I asked, barely containing my tears. He pushed me, and I pushed him back. He hit his head, he fell, he didn't move. His voice broke. I listened paralyzed, as if it weren't my son speaking, as if suddenly I were in front of a stranger. "I called Claire," he continued. "She came right away. She yelled at me, told me to calm down, that she would handle it. And what did she do? She made me leave the place. She said she would take care of everything, that no one should know." I closed my eyes, remembered the blood on the elevator floor, Samuel's note, the fear in his eyes, the metallic reflection, the shadow behind. Everything fit. "And why didn't you tell me before?" I asked with a trembling voice. "Because I was afraid, Mom. Afraid of losing you." "You already lost me, son." The words came out without thinking, and they hurt me as much as they hurt him. David collapsed on the sofa, crying. I looked at him, not knowing whether to hug him or scream at him. I had in front of me the boy who was once my pride, my reason for living, and at the same time the man who had destroyed what little faith I had left. Dawn began to dye the living room a sad color. We stayed in silence for a long time. Only the sound of his crying filled the air. Finally, he said something that disarmed me. "I don't know if God can forgive me, but I want you to." I stood looking at him. He was waiting for an answer, but I didn't give it to him right away. Forgiveness. What a big word. Easy to say when nothing has been lost, but when everything has been lost, it weighs like a stone in the chest. "I can't promise you that," I told him, "but I can try." He got up and hugged me. I felt his body tremble against mine, like when he was little and had a fever. For an instant, I went back to being his mother. Just his mother, without judgments, without rage, without fear. But in some corner of my soul, a voice whispered that love shouldn't blind me again, because if I truly loved him, I had to let him face what he did. We separated in silence. "Claire manipulated you," I told him, "but that doesn't absolve you." "I know," he whispered, "and that's why I'm going to turn myself in." "What?" "I already spoke to a lawyer. I want to confess. I can't keep living with this." My legs trembled. "Don't do it." "I have to do it. Mom, you taught me that mistakes aren't hidden. They are faced. Not like this. There is no other way." His eyes were full of tears, but also of a peace I hadn't seen in years. And I understood that I couldn't stop him anymore. That night, after he left, the house was silent again. A new, different silence. It wasn't one of guilt or sadness. It was the silence before the final judgment. I sat in front of the portrait of Edward, my husband. I spoke to him in a low voice, as if he could hear me. "Old man, he's going to turn himself in. He says he wants to do it for dignity." In the gloom, Edward's face seemed to look at me with a mixture of compassion and serenity. I closed my eyes, and for an instant felt his voice. "Don't destroy your son, Grace. Let him save himself through his own guilt." I cried. I cried with all my soul because I understood that a mother's love isn't measured by how much she protects, but by how much she lets go. The next morning, the phone rang. It was the detective on the case. "Mrs. Miller, we found something you should hear." I showed up at the precinct. In a small room, they showed me a recording recovered from Claire's archive. When they played it, Edward's voice filled the room. "If you are listening to this, Grace, it is because everything went wrong. Claire is not what she appears. But if something happens to me, don't seek revenge. Take care of David. He isn't bad, he is blind. Don't let hatred sink him more than he already is. If you ever have to choose between the truth and your son, choose to save his soul." I covered my mouth so as not to scream. Tears clouded my vision. Edward had known. He had seen the storm coming and yet tried to save us all. I returned home with my soul in pieces. At the door, David was waiting for me, his eyes swollen, his gaze resigned. "I've decided, Mom," he said. "I'm going to turn myself in." "No." "Yes. I can't keep running. I don't want my life to be one more lie." We hugged in silence. I felt his heart beating desperately against mine, and I knew there was no turning back. "Whatever you do," I whispered in his ear, "do it with dignity." He pulled away, kissed my forehead, and left. I watched him walk down the hallway without looking back, and in that instant, I understood that sometimes the purest love consists of letting children pay for their own mistakes. That night the rain returned. The sound of water against the glass was like a sad but serene melody. I lit a candle and sat in front of Edward's portrait. "I took care of him, old man," I told him, "as you asked me. But I also let him go. The flame flickered softly as if answering me, and then I understood everything. Redemption doesn't always come with glory or absolution. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the form of surrender, in the acceptance that no one escapes their own shadow. I got up, opened the window, and let the fresh air of the early morning enter. I took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace because I understood that forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it allows you to live without it consuming you. And that night, while the city slept, I realized that I was also ready to start over. They say truth always arrives late, but what no one tells you is what to do when it finally arrives, because when truth knocks on the door, it doesn't bring relief, it brings consequences. The morning after David turned himself in, I woke up with a strange sensation. It wasn't sadness or relief. It was as if for the first time in years my soul had room to breathe. However, the peace was incomplete, because I still needed to understand what had really happened in that elevator, why Samuel had left me that note, and why, even after death, I still felt like he was protecting me. That afternoon, while organizing Edward's desk, I found a small metal keychain with the name Vance engraved on the back. It was so simple that at first I didn't give it any importance, but something inside me made me turn it over. On the inside, there was a tiny slot. I inserted a needle, and a hidden cover popped open. Inside was a memory card. I put it in the computer. There was a single file with no name. I clicked it. The screen filled with a blurry recording taken with a security camera. My husband Edward appeared sitting in his office. Beside him, a young man about 40 with a sparse beard and tired eyes. It was Samuel Vance. "Edward, if something happens to me, I want this recording to reach my wife. She must know the truth." "Samuel, are you sure, Mr. Miller? If this comes to light, your daughter-in-law won't be the only one implicated." "Edward, I know, but I can't keep quiet anymore. Claire isn't alone." "Samuel, is there someone else?" "Edward." "Who?" Edward sighs. "My son." I covered my mouth. My heart hit me with such force that I had to sit down. I kept watching. "Edward. David signed documents without knowing what he was doing. She used him. But if this continues, it will end up ruining his life. If you can protect Grace and him, do it, Samuel." "Samuel, I'll do what I can. But if something happens to you, they'll know it was her, Edward." "Edward. And if I die, tell Grace it wasn't an accident." The video cut off. I sat staring at the screen for several minutes, unable to move. Samuel had been my husband's guardian, and then mine. He knew what was about to happen, and left me that note not only to save me from Claire but also from my own son. That night I went back to the elevator building. I needed to look at that place one last time. The manager allowed me in, although they had already sealed it. The hallway was empty. The lights flickered with a soft hum. The elevator remained closed, but the dry blood still marked the floor like a scar. I knelt in front of the door and rested my forehead against the cold metal. "Thank you, Samuel," I whispered, "because now I understand everything." 10 minutes after he handed me the note, when I ran out of there pretending to be sick, he didn't go down alone. I replayed the scene in my mind as if it were happening again. The elevator closed. Samuel stayed inside. David, nervous, was waiting for him downstairs. They argued. Samuel tried to protect me and warn him. David, blinded by fear, pushed him. Samuel fell, and when Claire arrived, it was too late. She took advantage of the tragedy to erase evidence, manipulate recordings, eliminate traces, and during all that time, I, blinded by rage, hated her without knowing that deep down she had only covered up my own son's sin. The next day dawned with a gray sky. I received a call from the district attorney. "Mrs. Miller, your son confessed partially. He said it was an accident, that there was no intent. And what will happen to him? The judge will decide. But his statements helped clarify the corruption ring. Thanks to you, the case will be closed with justice." I hung up the phone without saying anything. Justice. What an empty word when everything has already been lost. The following weeks were a parade of journalists, lawyers, and curious neighbors. The building filled with rumors. Some said there was a curse, others that the old lady on the 7th floor me was a vengeful witch. I learned not to listen. People always seek entertainment in other people's pain. But one morning, when going down to the mailbox, I found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet. Thank you for believing in me until the end. Below that, S. I couldn't help but smile. It was his handwriting, shaky, hurried, but unmistakable. I didn't know if he had left it before dying or if someone had put it there in his name, but deep down, it didn't matter. It was the closure I needed. In time, David was sentenced to a reduced term. The judge considered that there was no intent to kill. I attended the trial every day, sitting in the back row, not to judge him, but to accompany him, although he didn't always dare to look at me. During his final statement, he said something that made me cry. I don't ask for clemency. I only want my mother to know that everything I am, the good and the bad, I learned from her. And for the first time in months, I smiled, because in the midst of so much pain, those words were my redemption. When he got out of prison, 2 years later, he came to see me. He had aged, but his eyes had a new light, humble. We hugged for a long time. We didn't talk about the past. It wasn't necessary anymore. Forgiveness had stopped being a word and had become a place where we could both breathe. And now what will you do? I asked him. Leave, he replied. Start over somewhere else, but this time without lies. And Claire asked for a divorce from prison. I don't want to hear about her again. I nodded in silence. When he left, I watched him walk down the building hallway. Just like that night, he turned himself in. Only now he wasn't fleeing. He was looking to live again. Months passed. The building, once charged with shadows, began to fill with life. New neighbors, children laughing in the hallways, flowers in the windows. I also started going out more. I went back to gardening, reading in the park, watching sunsets without feeling guilt. One afternoon, while pruning my roses, a young woman approached me. She had brown hair and light eyes. Are you Mrs. Miller? She asked. Yes, I'm Samuel Vance's daughter. I was left speechless. My father talked about you a lot, she said with a shy smile. He always said that if something happened to him, I should come to thank you. Thank me? Yes, because he said you represented what he never had. A clean conscience. Her voice trembled. I caressed her cheek. No, child. It was the other way around. He taught me not to give up. She handed me a small box. This was his. He kept it with your name. Inside was a silver pendant with an inscription, 10 minutes can change a life. And then I understood it all. Samuel had known that those 10 minutes between handing me the note and his death would be the turning point of my story. 10 minutes to get out of the elevator, save myself, and start uncovering everything. That night I lit a candle for him, and for Edward, and for all the silences that had ended in screams. I sat in front of the window watching the city lights and thought about what we had lived, how life can twist with a single decision, how love and guilt can get confused, and how, despite everything, there is always a way to redeem oneself. Sometimes they ask me if I regret having uncovered this whole story. I tell them no. Because the truth hurts, yes. But the lie poisons slowly. And I prefer a clean wound to a life rotten with secrets. My son now lives far away. He calls me every week. He has a different voice, calmer, more serene. Sometimes he sends me letters, always signed the same way, your son, the one who learned to tell the truth. And every time I read them, I feel that somehow Edward and Samuel also rest in peace. Today, as I write these last lines, the sun enters through the window. The building elevator is working again. No one fears it anymore. Sometimes I hear children playing near it, laughing without knowing everything that place once hid. I watch them from my balcony with a cup of hot tea in my hands and think that maybe life is that an elevator that goes up and down, taking us through moments we believe eternal until someone leaves us a note that changes the course. I smile, close my eyes, and whisper, "Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Edward. Thank you, life." Because 10 minutes later I understood that it's not about how much pain we can endure, but how much love we are capable of keeping after losing everything. They say that when a woman reaches a certain age, she fears nothing. It's not true. She just learns to fear in a different way. She no longer fears pain or loneliness. She fears forgetting who she was. I, Grace Miller, went through the deepest darkness a mother can imagine. I saw a good man die. I discovered betrayal in my own home and understood that love, the kind we believe is eternal, can also become a weapon if used wrongly. For years I thought life had taken too much from me, but now I know it was actually giving me back the essentials. The truth, even if it hurts, freedom, even if late, and peace, even if it arrives in silence. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering without the memory destroying you. And when you achieve that, when you can look back without resentment, then finally life returns your smile. Sometimes I wake up in the early morning and stare at the window. The building sleeps, the elevator lights flicker softly, and I think that somewhere Samuel and Edward are still watching over me. Maybe they smile too, knowing their sacrifice wasn't in vain. My son David now lives far away. We write letters every week. There are no reproaches, just simple, human, sincere words, because we both learned that the truth, however cruel, unites more than any well-told lie. And if I can leave you with something today, you who are listening to my story, it is this lesson. Don't let fear silence you. Don't allow the guilt of others to steal your voice. And above all, don't confuse love with obedience. True love never forces you to give up on yourself. Sometimes a note, a gesture, or a simple "pretend you're sick" is enough to change the course of an entire life. And although the past cannot be rewritten, one can learn to tell it without tears. And now, before saying goodbye, I want to extend a very special invitation. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and leave a like if this story touched your heart. That helps me see that you accompany me, that you listen to me, and that I don't walk alone on this journey of memories and scars. And please, comment down below which city you are watching us from. I would love to read your comments, to know where your voice comes from, because every story, every comment, is proof that there are still people who feel, who cry, and who believe in the power of truth. I am Grace Miller, and this was my story, a story of pain, redemption, and true love. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, the truth may take time, but it always arrives. Yeah,